Book 3. After Buddha was dead, his shadow was still shown for centuries in a cave, a tremendous, gruesome shadow. God is dead, but given the way of men, there may still be caves for thousands of years in which his shadow will be shown. And we still have to vanquish his shadow, too. Let us beware of thinking that the world is a living being. Where should it expand? On what should it feed? How could it grow and multiply? We have some notion of the nature of the organic, and we should not reinterpret the exceedingly derivative. Let us even beware of believing that the universe is a machine. It is certainly not constructed for one purpose, and calling it a machine does it far too much honor. Let us beware of saying that there are laws in nature. There are only necessities. There is nobody who commands, nobody who obeys, nobody who trespasses. Once you know that there are no purposes, you also know that there is no accident, for it is only beside a world of purposes that the word accident has meaning. Let us beware of saying that death is opposed to life. The living is merely a type of what is dead, and a very rare type. Let us beware of thinking that the world eternally creates new things. There are no eternally enduring substances. Matter is as much of an error as the god of the Eleatics. But when shall we ever be done with our caution and care? When will all these shadows of God cease to darken our minds? When will we complete our deification of nature? When may we begin to naturalize humanity in terms of a pure, newly discovered, newly redeemed nature? The strength of knowledge does not depend on its degree of truth but on its age on the degree to which it has been incorporated. On its character as a condition of life. Gradually, the human brain became full of such judgments and convictions. And a ferment, struggle, and lust for power developed in this tangle. Not only utility and delight but every kind of impulse took sides in this fight about truths. The intellectual fight became an occupation, an attraction, a profession, a duty, something dignified, and eventually knowledge and the striving for the true found their place as a need among other needs. Thus, knowledge became a piece of life itself. And hence a continually growing power until eventually knowledge collided with those primeval basic errors, two lives, two powers. A thinker is now that being in whom the impulse for truth and those life-preserving errors clashes for their first fight. After the impulse for truth has proved to be also a life-preserving power. Compared to the significance of this fight, everything else is a matter of indifference. The ultimate question about the conditions of life has been posed here, and we confront the first attempt to answer this question by experiment. To what extent can truth endure incorporation? That is the question, that is the experiment. How did logic come into existence in man's head? Certainly, out of illogic. The dominant tendency. However, to treat as equal what is merely similar an illogical tendency. For nothing is really equal as what first created any basis for logic. The course of logical ideas and inferences in our brain today corresponds to a process and a struggle among impulses that are, taken singly, very illogical and unjust. We generally experience only the result of this struggle because this primeval mechanism now runs its course so quickly and is so well concealed. Cause and effect explanation is what we call it. But it is description that distinguishes us from older stages of knowledge and science. Our descriptions are better. We do not explain any more than our predecessors. The series of causes confronts us much more completely, and we infer, first, this and that has to precede in order that this or that may then follow, but this does not involve any comprehension. We operate only with things that do not exist, lines, planes, bodies, atoms, divisible time spans, divisible spaces. How should explanations be at all possible when we first turn everything into an image, our image? Cause and effect, such a duality probably never exists. In truth, we are confronted by a continuum out of which we isolate a couple of pieces, just as we perceive motion only as isolated points and then infer it without ever actually seeing it. An intellect that could see cause and effect as a continuum and a flux and not, as we do, in terms of an arbitrary division and dismemberment, would repudiate the concept of cause and effect and deny all conditionality. The time seems remote when artistic energies and the practical wisdom of life will join with scientific thinking to form a higher organic system in relation to which scholars, physicians, artists, and legislators as we know them at present would have to look like paltry relics of ancient times. As soon as we see a new image, we immediately construct it with the aid of all our previous experiences, depending on the degree of our honesty and justice. All experiences are moral experiences. Even in the realm of sense perception. Man has been educated by his errors. First, he always saw himself only incompletely. Second, he endowed himself with fictitious attributes. Third, he placed himself in a false order of rank in relation to animals and nature. Fourth, he invented ever new tables of goods and always accepted them for a time as eternal and unconditional. As a result, now one and now another human impulse and state held first place and was ennobled because it was esteemed so highly. If we removed the effects of these four errors, we should also remove humanity, humaneness, and human dignity. The more we abjure the dogma of the equality of men, the more must the concept of a normal health, along with the normal diet and the normal course of an illness, be abandoned by medical men. Only then would the time have come to reflect on the health and illness of the soul, and to find the peculiar virtue of each man in the health of his soul. Life is no argument. The conditions of life might include error. Christianity, 2. has made a great contribution to the Enlightenment, and taught moral skepticism very trenchantly and effectively, accusing and embittering men. Yet with untiring patience and subtlety it destroyed the faith in his virtues in every single individual. However, we have applied the same skepticism also to all religious states and processes, such as sin, repentance, grace, sanctification, and we have allowed the worm to dig so deep that now we have the same sense of subtle superiority and insight when we read any Christian book. We also know religious feelings better. The pious people of the old faith are dying out, too. Let us save their image and their type at least for knowledge. Without the passion to know, science would still be promoted, after all. Science has grown and matured without it until now. Science is considered not a passion but a mere condition or an ethos. In antiquity the dignity and recognition of science were diminished by the fact that even her most zealous disciples placed the striving for virtue first. And one felt that knowledge had received the highest praise when one celebrated it as the best means to virtue. It is something new in history that knowledge wants to be more than a mere means. The madman, have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace, and cried incessantly, I seek God. I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Emigrated? Thus, they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried, I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns. Are we not plunging continually? Backward. Sideward. Forward. In all directions. There's still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods, 2. decompose. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us for the sake of this deed he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they, too, were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke into pieces and went out. I have come too early, he said then, my time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering, it has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time, the light of the stars requires time, deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been related further that on the same day the madman forced his way into several churches and there struck up his Requiem aeternam Deo. Let out and came to account, he is said always to have replied nothing but, what after all are these churches now if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? Mystical explanations are considered deep. The truth is that they are not even superficial. Every thoughtless person supposes that will alone is effective, that willing is something simple, a brute datum, underivable, and intelligible by itself. The feeling of will seems sufficient to him not only for the assumption of cause and effect but also for the faith that he understands their relationship. The propositions, no effect without a cause, every effect in turn a cause, appear as generalizations of much more limited propositions, no affecting without willing, one can have an effect only on beings that will, no suffering of an effect is ever pure and without consequences. But all suffering consists of an agitation of the will, toward action, resistance, revenge, retribution. Willing is actually a mechanism, that is so well practiced that it all but escapes the observing eye. First, for will to come into being an idea of pleasure and displeasure is needed. Second, When a strong stimulus is experienced as pleasure or displeasure, this depends on the interpretation of the intellect which, to be sure, generally does this work without rising to out-consciousness. One and the same stimulus can be interpreted as pleasure or displeasure. Third, it is only in intellectual beings that pleasure, displeasure, and will are to be found. The vast majority of organisms has nothing of the sort. Prayer has been invented for those people who really never have thoughts of their own and who do not know any elevation of the soul, or at least do not notice it when it occurs. What are they to do at sacred sites and in all significant situations in life? Their kind of prayer has been invented for the benefit of the pious who do know thoughts and elevations of their own. The poor in spirit do not know what to do. And if one forbade them their prayer rattling, one would deprive them of their religion. What religion wants from the masses is no more than that they should keep still with their eyes, hands, legs, and other organs. That way they become more beautiful for a while and look more like human beings. What is now decisive against Christianity is our taste, no longer our reasons. What? A God who loves men, provided only that they believe in him, and who casts an evil eye and threats upon anyone who does not believe in this love. What? A love encapsuled in if clauses attributed to an almighty God? A love that has not even mastered the feelings of honor and vindictiveness? How oriental this is! If I love you, is that your concern? Is a sufficient critique of the whole of Christianity. Buddha says, do not flatter your benefactor. Repeat the saying in a Christian church, right away it clears the air of everything Christian. Religious war has signified the greatest progress of the masses hitherto, for it proves that the mass has begun to treat concepts with respect. Religious wars start only after the more refined quarrels between sects have refined reason in general to the point where even the mob becomes subtle and takes trifles seriously. And actually, considers it possible that the eternal salvation of the soul might hinge on small differences between concepts. A diet that consists predominantly of rice leads to the use of opium and narcotics, just as a diet that consists predominantly of potatoes leads to the use of liquor. But it also has subtler effects that include ways of thinking and feeling that have narcotic effects. They would like to impose that as a law upon the masses. In this way they want to create and increase the need that they are in a position to satisfy. Germans originally meant heathen. That is what the Goths after their conversion called the great mass of their unbaptized kindred tribes, heathen, the word that in Greek means the nations. Europe would never have become Christian in the first place if the culture of the ancient world in the south had not gradually been barbarized through an excessive admixture of Teutonic barbarian blood, thus losing its cultural superiority. Where someone rules, there are masses, and where we find masses, we also find a need to be enslaved. Where men are enslaved, there are few individuals, and these are opposed by herd instincts and conscience. Of the origin of religion, the metaphysical need is not the origin of religions, as Schopenhauer supposed, but merely a late offshoot. Under the rule of religious ideas, one has become accustomed to the notion of another world, behind, below, above, and when religious ideas are destroyed, one is troubled by an uncomfortable emptiness and deprivation. From this feeling grows once again another world, but now merely a metaphysical one that is no longer religious. But what first led to the positing of another world in primeval times was not some impulse or need, but an error in the interpretation of certain natural events. A failure of the intellect. You have no idea what you are living through, you rush through life as if you were drunk and now and then fall down some staircase. But thanks to your drunkenness you never break a limb, your muscles are too relaxed and your brain too benighted for you to find the stones of these stairs as hard as we do. For us life is more dangerous. We are made of glass, woe unto us if we merely bump ourselves. And all is lost if we fall. We love what is great in nature, and we have discovered this because in our heads great human bane $8 are lacking. Anyone who is unyielding nowadays will often have a bad conscience due to his honesty, for being unyielding is a virtue that does not belong to the same age as the virtue of honesty. The ex-priest and the released criminal keep making faces, what they desire is a face without a past. But have you ever seen people who know that their faces reflect the future and who are so polite to you who love the age that they make a face without future? Egoism is the law of perspective applied to feelings. What is closest appears large and weighty, and as one moves farther away size and weight decrease. What is best about a great victory is that it liberates the victor from the fear of defeat. Why not be defeated sometime, too? He says to himself, now I am rich enough for that. The spirits who seek rest I recognize by the many dark objects with which they surround themselves. Those who want to sleep make their room dark or crawl into a cave. A hint for those who do not know what it is that they seek most, but who would like to know. If one renounces something thoroughly and for a long time and then accidentally encounters it again, one may almost think that one has discovered it, and how much happiness is there in discovery. Let us be wiser than the serpents who lie too long in the same sunlight. Whatever in nature and in his story is of my own kind, speaks to me, spurs me on, and comforts me, the rest I do not hear or forget right away. We are always only in our own company. One speaks of being sick of man only when one can no longer digest him and yet has one's stomach full of him. Misanthropy comes of an all too greedy love of man and cannibalism, but who asked you to swallow men like oysters, Prince Hamlet? Some people need open enemies if they are to rise to the level of their own virtue, virility, and cheerfulness. When the gratitude of many to one throws away all shame, we behold fame. Those who know that they are profound strive for clarity. Those who would like to seem profound to the crowd strive for obscurity. For the crowd believes that if it cannot see to the bottom of something it must be profound. It is so timid and dislikes going into the water. Poor reigning princes. All of their rights are suddenly changing into claims, and all these claims begin to sound like presumption. One has to talk the Germans out of their Mephistopheles. And their Faust as well. These are two moral prejudices against the value of knowledge. Thoughts are the shadows of our feelings, always darker, emptier, and simpler. Those who live alone do not speak too loud nor write too loud. For they fear the hollow echo, the critique of the nymph echo. And all voices sound different in solitude. The foremost musician, one who knew only the sadness of the most profound happiness, and no other sadness at all. Poor he is poor today. But not because one has taken everything away from him, he has thrown away everything. What is that to him? He is used to finding things. It is the poor who misunderstand his voluntary poverty. Bad conscience, everything he is doing now is decent and in order, and yet he has a bad conscience. For the extraordinary in his task. A thinker, he knows how to make things simpler than they are. The open-hearted. That person probably always acts in accordance with secret reasons. For he always has communicable reasons on his lips and practically in his open hand. Laughable. Look. Look. He is running away from people, but they follow after him because he is running ahead of them. They are heard through and through. One hears only those questions for which one is able to find answers. There is nothing we like so much to communicate to others as the seal of secrecy, along with what lies under it. Laughter means being schadenfroh but with a good conscience. Need is considered the cause why something came to be, but in truth it is often merely an effect of what has come to be. It is raining, and I think of the poor who now huddle together with their many cares and without any practice at concealing these. Each is ready and willing to hurt the other and to create for himself a wretched kind of pleasure even when the weather is bad. That and only that is the poverty of the poor. He is envious. Let us hope that he will not have children. For he would envy them because he cannot be a child any more. Ideal and material, the ideal you envisage is noble. But are you a noble enough stone to be made into such a divine image? Anyway, is your work not that of a barbarous sculptor? Is it not a blasphemy against your ideal? Cause and effect. Before the effect one believes in different causes than one does afterward. I fear that the animals consider man as a being like themselves that has lost in a most dangerous way its sound animal common sense. They consider him the insane animal, the laughing animal, the weeping animal, the miserable animal. He cannot control himself. And from that a poor woman infers that it will be easy to control him and casts her net for him. Soon she will be his slave. Seeing things as similar and making things the same is the sign of weak eyes. Either we have no dreams or our dreams are interesting. We should learn to arrange our waking life the same way, nothing or interesting. What I do or do not do now is as important for everything that is yet to come as is the greatest event of the past. In this tremendous perspective of effectiveness all actions appear equally great and small. Without envy he is utterly without envy, but there is no merit in that. For he wants to conquer a country that nobody has possessed and scarcely anyone has even seen. Happiness is not nearly so contagious a disease. Why? Improvements are invented only by those who can feel that something is not good. Even one's thoughts one cannot reproduce entirely in words. Let us introduce the refinement and rigor of mathematics into all sciences as far as this is at all possible. Not in the faith that this will lead us to know things but in order to determine our human relation to things. Mathematics is merely the means for general and ultimate knowledge of man. Every habit lends our hand more wit but makes our wit less handy. What good is a book that does not even carry us beyond all books? Always at home one day we reach our goal. And now point with pride to the long travels we undertook to reach it. In fact, we were not even aware of traveling. But we got so far because we fancied at every point that we were at home. If you are always profoundly occupied, you are beyond all embarrassment. Some do not know how rich they are until they experience how rich people steal from them. From paradise good and evil are the prejudices of God, said the snake. When we are in love, we wish that our defects might remain concealed not from vanity but to keep the beloved from suffering. Indeed, the lover would like to seem divine and this, too, not from vanity. What are man's truths ultimately? Merely his irrefutable errors. Where cruelty is needed, those who have greatness are cruel to their virtues and to secondary considerations. With a great goal one is superior even to justice, not only to one's deeds and one's judges. What makes one heroic? Going out to meet at the same time one's highest suffering and one's highest hope. In what do you believe? In this, that the weights of all things must be determined anew. What does your conscience say? You shall become the person you are. Where are your greatest dangers? And pity. What do you love in others? My hopes. Whom do you call bad? Those who always want to put to shame. What do you consider most humane? To spare someone shame. What is the seal of liberation? No longer being ashamed in front of oneself.